And get started. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining Unlocking the Power of Data, How HIEs Can Better Support Their Participants webinar. My name is Jordan Leibovitz, and I'm part of the marketing team here at IMO. Before we get started, I want to take care of a few items for those attending. First off, this webinar is being recorded and will be available to you for future viewing. Throughout the sessions, all attendees will be in listen-only mode, so if you have any questions, please type them into the questions section on your GoToWebinar console. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A as well, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. But if for any reasons yours is not addressed, someone will be able to follow up with you after the presentation. We like to keep things interactive. Throughout the presentation, we'll be launching poll questions for you to answer. So housekeeping aside, John Larson, our VP of Business Development here at IMO, is going to start things off.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for attending. My name is John Larson. I lead business development here at IMO. I'm excited for this conversation. We have a great panelist, and we actually have some really strong attendees. So thanks for taking some time. And I hope your 2020 is wrapping up well. I consider 2020 the year of the never-ending webinar. Feels like so I really appreciate that you took some time from your Zoom meeting to attend this online meeting. With that in mind, we're going to try to keep it pretty light and interactive. As you can see, we've got some strong participants on the presenter side here. Each one's going to introduce themselves throughout the course of the meeting, but I'll just highlight that we have Jamie and Naresh, who here at IMO we're privileged enough to work with on a weekly basis as leadership of Kneehigh. And we have my colleague Matt Cardwell on as well. We're going to begin the conversation, and we want you to ask questions. Please put them into the chat of the webinar. We may answer them throughout, but we'll certainly have time at the end. We want this to be as interactive as possible. And because it's interactive, we're actually going to ask you to answer a few questions throughout the webinar. This is not homework. It should just take a few seconds of your time. But maybe, Jordan, can you, or Matt, can you bring up the first poll question here?
Sure thing.
All right, since we have one of the leading health information exchange organizations in the country on the phone, we wanted to make sure we check your familiarity with HIEs. So if you can take a look and just document your familiarity with the HIEs, and then I'll turn it over to Jamie once we're done here.
Okay, a few more seconds, and then I'll close the poll out. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close out.
All right, Matt, if you want to advance. Well, it's my honor to introduce Jamie Bland, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Kneehigh. She'll give you a brief overview of the organization, but I've been fortunate enough to know Jamie now for the last couple months when we began our partnership. Jamie's a strategic leader in the industry, and the organization that she leads is kind of blazing new trails in defining itself and redefining itself as a partner to the healthcare ecosystem in Nebraska and abroad. Even my home state of Iowa now is partnering with Kneehigh. So I'm excited to turn over the mic to you, Jamie, and if you want to give us an introduction for you and Naresh, and then give us some background about Kneehigh in general.
Great, thank you, John. So with me today is Naresh, who is the Chief Technology Officer for Kneehigh, and we'll be answering some of your more complex questions, I'm sure. But for me, I'm the President and CEO of the Nebraska Health Information Initiative, which we will dive into a little bit around why that makes us different and that we are a health information initiative versus solely an HIE. But I will turn it over to Naresh to introduce himself and give a little bit of his background as well.
Sure, thanks, Jamie. This is Naresh, by the way, and it's been almost a year with Kneehigh, I could say, and I'm currently serving as Chief Technology Officer as well as VP Tech Ops. So my background is in informatics and also computer science. Worked a lot with terminology server in my history, so that's where I come from, and HIEs an area of interest for.
Great. So we'll jump right into the Kneehigh overview if you want to advance to the next slide. So the mission of Kneehigh is to empower healthcare communities through the bullets that you see there. And the one that I think is a differentiator for Kneehigh is that delivering a trusted health data utility, and speaks to why we are in this partnership with IMO. It's very important to us to maintain and improve and enhance the data visualizations and the content that we deliver to our participants. And as I spoke earlier about the Health Information Initiative, we are the Health Information Exchange, the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program, and the Community Information, or SDOH, platform for the state of Nebraska and well into Western Iowa, and we have other emerging Iowa partnerships as well. So from that broad footprint of data acquisition, hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, clinics, pharmacies all contribute data to the Health Information Exchange. And why and what led us to the complexity of needing a terminology server and the partnership with IMO is that the products that we try to deliver back to our participants not only require good data integrity and data quality, but also the components around the various use cases really brought this to needing this partnership. Next slide. So Health Information Exchange and Kneehigh as a trailblazer, this is something that, you know, really from the broad acquisition of information, I think is really unique to Nebraska, in that we have no mandates for a Health Information Exchange, but we do have a mandatory submission of information for medication history in Nebraska. We have the vast majority of the acute care encounters that happen in the state. And then we've expanded into clinics, ambulatory care, surgical centers, FQHCs, long-term post-acute, and now the community-based organizations. So we connect 4.2 million lives across the geographic footprint that is rooted in Nebraska, but certainly encompasses the border counties and then well into Western Iowa as well. We have broad clinician utilization from frontline healthcare workers to pharmacy locations, and really do partner with other health information exchanges, and are coming to terms with the last bullet there, that we're one of the most mature and advanced health information exchanges in the country. One, because this industry is still very new. I mean, we've been around for a decade, so it's kind of a juxtaposition to say you're the most mature and you're 10 years old, right? So it just speaks to the emerging use cases for health information exchange and how the marketplace is changing. Next slide. So a little bit about the Health Information Exchange and PDMP is that we are very comprehensive in those data sets. And then the newest thing that we added this year was the Social Determinants of Health platform. And again, we have a product portfolio that we offer to participants, but connecting the community to really understand what is the journey through the healthcare ecosystem, what is the housing insecurity, the food insecurity, the unemployment issues that happened with COVID-19, all of those contribute to long-term health outcomes and are critical for us to bring into this longitudinal health record concept, which Naresh will explain to you in a little more detail, and is really some of the underpinnings of our work in this space. We also have the Health Care Collaborative, in which we have academic affiliates that are contributors to our strategy, growth, and vision of the organization, the Kneehigh Foundation and Kneehigh Shared Services, which are really part of our governance structure and helps guide us through new partnerships, as well as where we really focus our resources. I would say the additional differentiator for Kneehigh is 50% of our team members are clinicians, and that ranges from nursing to pharmacists to our newest addition, which is a chief medical officer full-time with the organization. So quite a robust clinical expertise to draw upon, as well as the technical experts, which you'll hear from Naresh next.
Thank you, Jamie. So at a high level, Kneehigh handles disparate data sources, so multiple sources coming from health information exchange, facility data, prescription drug monitoring program, or prescription data with respect to Nebraska. And we also get social determinants of health data moving forward. So merging these different sources of data into a common record for an individual, which we call it as a longitudinal health record, is going to be helpful from every single point of reporting, registry, and also other use cases downstream. So that's the holistic idea with respect to what Kneehigh is trying to do, to bring multiple sources and aggregate it to make meaningful information out of it beyond the typical HIE tasks that we are looking at. So one of the things that we are looking at with respect to normalizing data, that's always a challenge. We look into ways by which we could merge these different sets of data, which means the same in one data set versus the other data set. So that's one of the things that would be the entire idea behind this talk when we are talking about. And at a high level, Kneehigh deploys within our technical expertise, we have data engineers, data architects, as well as support from external teams to help us achieve this longitudinal health record over a period of time. So with that, we could go to the next slide.
Before you dig in, Naresh, I think we got one more question for our participants, and then I know we'll kind of dig into what you just said there. Just a quick question for our participants. Given what Naresh said, standardizing data when it's coming from disparate sources is a major challenge. I'd be intrigued on, given the real breadth of attendees we have here, what are some of the ways that your organization is ensuring that standardization when that data comes in?
Giving it a few more seconds and then I'll close it out. Perfect.
You're up, Matt.
All righty. Well, greetings, everyone. Great to speak with you today. As John mentioned, I'm Matt Cardwell. I lead IMO's client success function here and get to work with great partners like Kneehigh. It's our pleasure to talk to them today. Jamie and Naresh, you touched on this briefly in the overview, just about the challenge of unlocking this longitudinal patient record. You've described it to me before as a 360-degree view of your patients. The importance of offering to that to your participants is no small task. I want to understand some of the technical challenges here in a minute, but before we dig in there, Jamie, can you share with us how you think about that today and why your journey towards delivering this led you to seek out a terminology partner on that journey?
Sure. So those disparate data sources come from hospitals, community, from pharmacies. So there's multiple normalization efforts that happen, and still we need another a little boost with a terminology server concept, which I'll let Naresh get into. But foundationally, the longitudinal health record concept is really bringing data from disparate data sources and ensuring that that data is matched to the right person and that it's accessible to a consumer in the market. So whether that we focus on APIs that are then delivered into a patient portal that is attached to a healthcare system, or we have one independently. Those are really part of the initiatives like the My Healthy Data initiative, in which clinical claims data are, part of the CMS infrastructure that they want to ensure that consumers have access to, because it is information that is part of the longitudinal journey across healthcare. We added SDOH to that, we added pharmacy data to that, so that's really part of what that strategic vision is. And I'll let Naresh add to that.
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. Technically, the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis are, for example, mapping codes from local codes to standardized codes. That's our biggest time investment. I see the 33% is handled from the previous question through internal informatics. So you can see, if you're an informaticist, you understand the time that you invest in mapping this manually. So those are pretty big challenges. And even if you're doing the mapping, sometimes you have to go for a lookup table that is not even existing, and you end up creating one. And then multiple informatics, you have to think about how scalable can you go with this, whatever lookup you have. This is integrated reliability and all those things, right? So these are the things that technically the challenges that we handle on a day-to-day basis. And as we go down on next use cases, I'll explain how we kind of use the terminology server to mitigate these challenges moving forward.
No, yeah, and no small task to keep all that updated either. Naresh, when we've spoken previously, you talked about some of these challenges coming into clearer focus as you've confronted the COVID pandemic. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that, specifically around some of the lab data aggregation that you're accomplishing there?
Right. So one of the things that we were working on with respect to bringing in reporting for public health functionalities using lab data and data from our HIE is that when we get the lab data, there are multiple ways by which a specific code with respect to COVID can be represented. There can be mistakes from typos, there could be data entry issues, and there could be local codes. And when we are asking for a question at the database level, we have to make sure we cover all those things from our end, what determines a positive, what determines a negative from COVID, and if the codes are standardized or not. So having a terminology server layer in between this would actually help us to normalize our queries that we are asking. In other words, if the data by itself is normalized, when we are asking for such questions, we are going to get the right data set back. So that's the idea behind what we are trying to do here. That's what we tried to do, and we did with our COVID reporting and normalizing that specific data sets. Thank you.
Great. I'd like to move on for just for a moment here, Naresh. Can you, I know challenge to aggregate multiple sources coming together. Even as you face that, it could still be the case that data is lost, granularity is lost. Can you provide us a couple of examples or speak to some of the data that you've seen lost previously?
Sure. One thing that at an enterprise level that we are trying to do now is MDM and data quality enhancement. So with respect to that, when we have, let's assume that we have local lab codes within our HIE data sets, right? So typically the workflow is for us to have an individual reach out to the source where the data is coming from, create another lookup from local to standardized codes, and then add that information back to our data analysts and data architects to push that through to standardize the code. So this is, you can see this is a very typical manual process. And this might differ from one entity or one facility to another facility. So for us to look at it at a high level approach to automate these things and not to still lose the granularity, what we are envisioning with IMO stack, IMO stands at the place of where the data gets entered into the system with respect to EHR. or EMR in this case. So if we could use the same ontology service to code it again from our enterprise data warehouse perspective, we can typically negate this particular manual workflow of going back to the source to improve the quality of our records and normalize it.
Naresh, the lab codes are a specific one that we hear constantly as a key challenge because there's so many local codes out there. The manual lift there, or the resource and time lift there, seems to be one of the highest. Is that your assessment, that that's kind of one of the bigger challenges, particularly as labs take a bigger in the COVID pandemic?
Right. Yeah, lab is always a challenge to us in any case, and there has to be a hybrid approach of handling this in an automated way with the technologies, as well as there are manual pipelines that we end up doing too, because it's not 100% right, and we still need to have that data included. Even every single record we miss, from public health standpoint of view, that's a big deal. Reporting, under-reporting, or over-reporting, or duplicated reporting, things like that.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you for that overview, Jamie and Naresh. I want to hand it over to John here for a minute to share some of the broader perspectives that we're seeing, not within the HIE space, definitely, but even outside of that. John.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Man, that picture, I have a lot more gray hair now than I do in that picture, so we should move beyond that really quickly. There we go. And Jamie, you can weigh in here as well, but I think the challenges that our conversations with Kneehigh are facing are not unique to this organization. They are really fundamental to the industry. I like this slide because for the people on this call, you guys know better than anybody else that the amount of information that is being created today in the healthcare ecosystem is growing astronomically. And it can often feel like a big wave coming over us. As Naresh mentioned, the standard codes that we're trying to resolve to are supposed to help, but those come with some inherent challenges in themselves. They're being updated all the time. And so you can often feel like you've resolved for ICD-9 and then ICD-10 comes out. ICD-11 will come out. So you're always feeling this data, even if you've already processed it, so you're going to have to keep focused on it to make it as useful as possible. So if you can move forward, Matt. IMO brings, I think, a unique perspective to this challenge. For the last 20 years, IMO has been really in the EMRs across the country. We now are embedded at 80% of the US acute care facilities. And our information, IMO's role in that is we're helping physicians document at that point of care. When the physician's sitting across from the patient and typing in the EMR about that patient's problems or the procedures, we're helping document that information. And just to make that real, if you can go to the next slide, Matt. What that looks like for a physician who's sitting and documenting in that medical record system, as much as we think they like to do that, physicians do not like to type out codes. They don't want to type out a SNOMED code. They don't want to type out ICD-9 or ICD-10. Physicians want to document in the way that they learned in residency and fellowship. And IMO enables that in Epic and Cerner and Meditech, where a physician can document in the term that they are familiar with, like infection due to COVID-19 virus, and then IMO links all of those standard codes behind the scenes. So we're going to make sure they can document clearly, but we're also going to then, in the EMR, map it to SNOMED, map it to ICD-10 and ICD-9 and so on. What that allows, that gives us a lot of information because that is happening. Those physicians are documenting using those IMO clinician-friendly terms billions of times a year across the English-speaking medical world. So IMO is there where much of that information, that wall of data that's coming is being generated. And that's one of the reasons Kneehigh reached out to us. If you want to move to the next slide. IMO is being used by hundreds of hospitals and clinics throughout the state of Nebraska. So much of that information that Naresh was speaking about was actually coming embedded with IMO information when it showed up at Kneehigh's doorstep. And that allowed us to help Kneehigh in a new way. And if you move forward, Matt, we can talk through the normalization. As Naresh mentioned, a lot of that information can be broken or maybe is missing when it arrives at the health information exchange. And this is where IMO can apply our knowledge from what's happening at the moment when that physician is documenting care to the information is now is being stored in the HIE. IMO created a normalization engine that is comprehensive in scope. So if Naresh's team receives a code, we can make sure if they receive an ICD-9 code, we can help them resolve that to an ICD-10 and provide the SNOMED equivalent of that. But even if they just receive a description, maybe just a snippet of a description that came across, because we're used in that point of care, we can help them decipher that description and make sure that we can resolve it to a standard code as well. So all of that broken information that's coming in, IMO can apply the leverage of what physicians are documenting at the point of care and use that to normalize it to and standardize it to a common definition. And once you've done that, if you move to the next slide, Matt, we can then provide Naresh and Jamie's teams with a real comprehensive picture on that patient. Even if we've just gotten a little bit at the beginning, we can now resolve it to a standard code and provide the primary and secondary ICD-10. We can provide the primary and secondary SNOMED, for example, risk flags and demographic information. So even if you got just a little bit at the beginning, you got now a full, complete data set that you can do deeper analysis. But it's also a data set that is tied directly back to what that physician documented at the point of care. And that's that connective tissue we want to help Kneehigh use for all the use cases that Jamie brought up at the beginning. Go ahead, Matt. And we know, given the size and the scale that your organizations are growing, we need to do this at that same size and scale. So just a couple things to point out on how IMO does this. We have millions of those clinical terms that are being used by those physicians every day. And that's what we apply to that normalization engine. The second thing I'll highlight is that our system is constantly learning. Because physicians are documenting across the English-speaking world, we can see the utilization of that. And they're actually creating new terms in real time that our team of clinicians and physicians are validating. So our matching algorithm, as new clinical concepts come up, is constantly being updated. So Naresh and Jamie hopefully don't have to worry about what's coming down the pipe. They can focus on the analytics. And we also incorporate all of those regulatory changes as well, reducing some of that manual burden on their team side. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, everyone. On mute.
Oh, Matt, you're on mute. Ah, perfect.
Perfect. Yeah, we got the bingo, the pandemic bingo there. Thank you. Yeah, John, thanks for that great overview on the exciting things that that we're working on together at IMO. I want to bring this back to some of the aspects of the partnership with Kneehigh. Naresh, can you talk to me, why this partnership, why the technology excites you from a scale perspective, from a technology acceleration perspective? What does this mean to you and your team and the ability to deliver for your participants?
Sure. At a high level, what I can think about is, so typically the workflow that I explained before, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel here, which is with IMO's existing knowledge repository, metadata repository. How do we leverage it in the most automated way for our teams to have the right data set at the right time for them to make those analytical decisions or data curation, quality improvement, as well as reporting and other functionalities. So that's one thing that we are looking at, how IMO could changes right now, our workflow. And the other interesting thing is there are multi-point connections that we are engaging with IMO. There is batch processing, which is very easy from our perspective. We drop a file in SFTP, we get the standardized codes back. These don't even have to be row-level identifiable information, right? So that's one thing. And then API connections for our transactional databases. So now that's much more useful for our analytical systems, specifically the user interface and applications that we have that's used for analytics and other reporting. So those API connections make it more scalable, and in a more automated way, thus normalization can happen on the fly versus someone has to do it every single time before the reporting process has to happen. So that's the path that we are going right now. And any other?
Great. Thank you, Naresh. Jamie, similar question, but perhaps broadening the aperture from your perspective as CEO. Suppose you were to fast forward today, a year from now, what do you see Kneehigh being able to do that that you're not doing today?
Well, I think what will happen is there will be, less conversation around, did we miss something? Why are these data elements not matching up? Is there, why is this, something that's misspelled showing up in the clinical viewer? There's all kinds of different visualization integrity issues that are solved through this type of architecture, and then that helps with credibility and consistency for our participants as well.
Great.
Jamie, as you thought through kind of some of the things around getting closer to the EMR and getting closer to that point of care documentation, how do you see some of the participants in the hospitals maybe reacting to this new normalization approach, or maybe data quality once it's completed?
Yeah, I think what I know our clinical team is looking forward to is that they'll have less questions about why is that showing up as a 2? Isn't that supposed to be something else? Or why is that showing up as, why is Nebraska not consistent? Why is it NE and NEB and Nebraska in a number of different variations? And those types of questions will be reduced. So very, solving for a basic administrative issue, but also then, some of those more complex scenarios that Naresh described, and that we'll feel more confident in that we're grabbing all of the data that we need to grab for for the multiple use cases that we prepare and curate.
Yeah, and Naresh, you may weigh in this as well, but one of the key things that we hear from not only Kneehigh, but from across the market is that cohorting, actually identifying the right patient population, is so critical and becoming even more important in whatever use case you're looking for. So I hope as we continue our partnership, we can help you refine those cohorts and make your participants value that analytical work you're doing even more.
Right. Yeah. Cohorting is one of the, if you look at all our use cases, it's pretty much cohorting, right? Reporting and like any request on the clinical views that we produce, it's pretty much cohorting. And then how do we reduce it through the clinical terminology? So if we are, again, goes back to the point of if we are going to miss the standardized approach, there are local codes out there. Are we picking that up? If we are not, then we are missing that. So do we have to go back to the source to get those local codes again? If there is IMO there, which exists with a different end layer with EMRs, which already knows how these local codes are coded. So can we leverage those local codes and then standardize our enterprise data warehouse in order for us to complete the cohort selection? So that's where it is, and that's where we are going with this.
Cool.
No, thank you, Jamie. Maybe by way of bringing this back around to some of the compelling, more visionary, forward-thinking ways that Kneehigh is operating. Could you offer a few defining steps for others as they're thinking about transforming their organizations in some of the same ways?
So take active steps to look at your data quality, work with your participants to understand what their use cases would be for data extracts of the information, and that very cohort scenario that you discussed more and more, how we can align health information exchange infrastructure to meet the needs of various alternative payment models and value-based care scenarios where we're looking for care gaps to be closed and not repeating lab tests and not repeating things because they're not able to be found in our infrastructure or through search or query. Those are the mechanisms that we're trying to solve for through better data integrity.
So let's move into Q&A. As John mentioned earlier, you can drop questions into the little question box in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. We've got a few already. I'm going to kick off with some of the ones that have been posed for Kneehigh. Not surprisingly, COVID is on the minds right now. I know that there's a big project launching here pretty soon, Naresh, that you mentioned. What else is going on at Kneehigh in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and how are you working with Nebraska and your participants to solve for this challenge?
Jamie, do you want to take that, or?
Well, Kneehigh has a very close relationship with the Department of Health and Human Services, and that includes public health and Medicaid and other human service agencies. So we have a number of initiatives in which we are tied in to the department's response for COVID-19. I think earlier in the presentation, we spoke of the lab use case, and at the start of COVID and then the number of different lab codes that were coming across, and now we are seeing the point of care testing variation in the COVID lab data as well. So I think just as the vaccines and point of care testing and different laboratories coming out with different testing, these challenges will just be iterative that we'll have to solve for over and over again. So I think that's part of the benefit of this type of architecture, and I'll turn it over to Naresh to offer anything to that scenario. But I think it's the COVID-19 response will just be something that we have to continuously improve on, and thankful for this type of partnership so that we can get ahead of that.
Thanks, Jamie. I think COVID is one of the use cases that's driving this. But beyond COVID, normalization and standardization has to happen no matter what, from our perspective at least, because we are dealing with multi-sources and how it is represented in one source versus other source, and add to that complexity of local codes versus standardized codes, and there is multiple layers of complexity involved when we are trying to do the standardization, right? And that's why we always see multiple standards exist there for the use cases as well. So given those things in consideration, for sure, it's more of an enterprise and enterprise-wide approach. It doesn't have to be restricted to only one specific use case as COVID, as we are discussing right now. It could be for quality reporting, it could be for public health reporting, it could be for registries, population, it could be for much more, right? So on the high level, that's what we are looking at.
Naresh, a few questions have come in around just reporting in general, and how the IMO Precision normalized engine fits in with that as you think about various reporting use cases, need for quality data, what might happen if there's an audit that comes in. How do you think about that from your seat as CTO?
So could I clarify the question about the audit again?
Yeah, I think just the question may be similar to the conversation that we had last week with the team. Just around how these pieces fit together, making sure that data integrity is preserved as we're trying to get to ground truth and what's coming from the clinical applications.
Got it. So how do you should probably think about this mostly IMO as a lookup server, right? What we are trying to do here is a terminology server. So it doesn't have to be that we change the data lineage in this process. The data lineage is still going to exist there. Here is what the raw sources or source of truth is saying, and here is the normalized process, and here is the normalized code. It's upon us to make the decision of reporting moving forward and keeping the lineage of this is how it was represented in the historical way, and this is how the normalized way is. So this is probably, the auditing has probably got nothing to do with the terminology lookup. That's my perception again. But again, there might be different opinions across. But as long as you keep the data lineage across, no matter what the reporting is or the future consumption downstream is, it could be traced back to where it was coming from, and you could be accountable to the records that you're reporting to.
Yeah,
Does it make sense?
It does, Naresh. You bring up a really good point. And the source data will always retain, but once you've used that normalization, one thing I know we talked with your team about is sharing with them our confidence and instilling some confidence in that normalization approach there. Because IMO has all of that documentation at the front of the medical record system, we use a different kind of confidence score there, but we're going to help your team look at that output and say, man, is this spot on, or is there some work that we need to do to further dig in there? And so even if there is some informaticists or some work there, you're going to be very prioritized on only the ones that maybe have a little bit of deviation, not the ones that are a certain match.
Yeah, just to add more to that, right? So how IMO classifies a match or not. So these are typical string matches. If it's not an exact match, then we are talking about a fuzzy match. So it's as much as close as a person reading out two different terms and thinking, okay, these are same terms, right? You put an edit distance on top of it. So what you're looking at is a measure which says that, okay, this is a match or not. So I could do it manually, or I could look for a service like IMO to do that automated way and reduce the burden on my informaticists to do that manually. So that's exactly what is happening here. And on top of that, you also get this source of truth as well as the new source, standardized source. So if you keep that, going back to the lineage, if you keep the lineage, auditability will not be an issue at any point.
Makes a lot of sense, Naresh. Thank you for sharing that. Jamie, a question to you. What drove the decision? Key factors around selecting IMO as your terminology partner.
Well, I think the one thing that we mentioned before, I think is that Kneehigh, has an analytic function and has ECQMs that we work towards. So we're constantly looking at the data quality and how we can reduce variation and how we can improve that, whether it be from the point of acquisition of information through the data feeds and the mappings, and ultimately we did all of that and still needed something. So I think that's just speaks to, once you get to a place of maturity where you've looked at other solutions, what can we do to fix some of the variability in the information and ensure consistency, so there's confidence in our information. And that's what led us to procurement of a terminology server. So, but I think that's part of next steps for health information exchanges and solving for various use cases over the long term will be how do you align your infrastructure so that you're solving for value-based care, for alternative payment models, for gap closure, and there needs to be confidence in the information that you're providing back to your participants.
Thanks, Jamie. I think I would like to add a little bit more to that from at a high level. Master data management, that's one thing. and data quality and metadata repository. If you just look at the standard way of enterprise data warehousing, these three things make sure that interoperability is effective or data integration is effective. So for us to have an interoperable solution that speaks the same language across, we have to make sure all our data sources are standardized in a way how it has to be so that the communication is seamless, be it just an API call or whatever it is. So at a high level, from an enterprise perspective, those are the things that we are looking at. Normalization is the first step towards that.
Oh, thank you both. John, a couple have floated in just around the IMO Precision normalized capabilities. I know you touched on this briefly, but just to call it back, does the engine offer code lookup, or we might talk about these as crosswalking capabilities? Can you speak to some of those more traditional functions?
Sure. Yeah, sure. And I think, and I'd be interested in Naresh's assessment as well, but the data that's coming into any data warehouse or HIE comes in various formats. So we built the normalization, precision normalize that engine to accommodate really whatever inputs we receive. So if we're receiving just the code, we can normalize that to a new code or to SNOMED, for example, ICD-9 to ICD-10 and the accompanying SNOMED with that. But what really distinguishes our solution is we can do that, but we also have, because of that description layer, that ontology layer that's being pressure tested in the EMRs every day, when we receive some of those descriptions, we can use that information as well. Even if we just receive a description, we can map that to a standard code. If we receive the description and the code, we can look at the two and see often they can be in conflict to help Naresh's team decipher which is the right one. So I think it's that description layer. Yes, we can do all that baseline code-to-code mapping, if that's the term you want to use there, but it's really the description or the ontology layer on top that's validated by clinician use that provides kind of an extra boost to the whole system. Naresh, is that your assessment as well?
Right, I could just give a practical example on that. So let's assume that we are getting a data source that's got a million records, and then we are just, now the burden is on the informaticist or the data analyst to do the standardization for each and every record. While there are ways by which they could actually group the data to one particular way to standardize it, let's put IMO to the play. Now, what happens with the terminology server basically is that we naturally get a score of anything more than 0.9 is pretty much a match. So we have guidelines on that. We have validated that. So what we have to focus is something that is, if it's a less than 0.5, we can with confidence tell that, okay, this is something we don't even have to invest time on. Now we're just stuck with something in between, which is 0.8s, 0.7s. So that's the threshold the team has to first focus on. So this, by just focusing on the 10% of the threshold, we are going to reduce the burden that is put on the analyst as well as the terminology person and the person who sits down there on a day-to-day basis and maps the data. So that's an example of how the engine can be more of proactive than reacting to.
Yep.
No, thank you both. I know we're talking pretty specifically about Kneehigh, and it's a HIE is in the title of the webinar, John. Is the IMO Precision normalized product specific to that segment?
It's not. And this is a great use case for us and one that we're very excited for, but really any place where EMR data is being aggregated is where this can be applicable. Our precision normalized engine is being used at clinical data registries, for example, enterprise data warehouses within large health systems. They're aggregating data from multiple systems, especially if they have different EMRs. But really, whenever that EMR data is being put into one place and you want to use that data to drive analytics or drive workflow, there's an opportunity to standardize that, and that's how we want to help. Anything else, Matt? These are good questions. All right, yeah. I like it.
No, unfortunately, I think that wraps us up for the Q&A. John, do you want to put a bow on the conversation today?
I do. Well, first, Jamie and Naresh, thank you guys for your time, and thank you all for the attendees. I know this is a busy time at the end of the year, and we really appreciate your attentiveness and the questions that you submitted. We're very excited for this partnership, but also to have a meaningful impact on how data is used across the industry. So with that, I will say goodbye and let everybody get back to their day, their next Zoom meeting, and we'll move on here. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all.